Support for Central Florida Public Media comes from JustCallMo.com and attorney Mo DeWitt, proud presenter of WMFE's Engage program. Mo DeWitt is committed to offering legal guidance in personal injury cases, such as car accidents and slip and falls. Offices in Orlando. More at JustCallMo.com. Welcome to Engage, leading conversations that matter. Engage is made possible with support from inaugural sponsor JustCallMo.com and the support of listeners like you.
You are listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Coming up, we'll look at new approaches to providing mental health services for student athletes. An optometric veterinarian talks about a shortage of animal specialists in Florida. And Orlando Fringe Festival storyteller Paul Strickland stops by to spin some tall tales. First, though, this afternoon, an arrest was made following Tuesday's devastating highway accident that left 8 migrant farm workers dead and dozens more injured, many critically. 41-year-old Brian Howard was taken into custody and charged with 8 counts of DUI manslaughter. For the victims of this accident, the future is in question. Fundraising efforts are underway to help with medical costs for the survivors, as well as bereavement aid for the families of the workers who died. Ernesto Ruiz is a research coordinator with the Farmworkers Association of Florida. The organization has been working to coordinate with victims' families, and he joined us with this update.
We talked to the brother of one of these workers, and he said that one of the ones who survived, that his first concern was, are we going to work tomorrow? Okay. So that shows the gravity of why they're here and the reason of the urgency of why they're here. They're leaving their families to a foreign country where they're often treated poorly, not because it's a joy for them, but because it's an economic necessity. The Mexican consulate is working with the crew, the team, to help them with repatriation of bodies, handle logistical issues. We have also set up a GoFundMe fundraiser to specifically address their financial needs, funeral costs, and even for the workers that there might be an investigation from the Department of Labor is what we've heard. And if that's the case, then they'll have to remain in Florida. This is just hearsay that we're hearing, nothing confirmed. Our understanding was that they're going to leave the state for the second part of their contract, but if they can't leave for the second part of their contract, then what happens to their income? So part of what we're trying to grapple with right now is identify their financial needs, their emotional needs, and hence that GoFundMe that we're setting up. A lot of unknowns.
Does that GoFundMe, is that the only option for healthcare? Help us understand, when people are under these visas, do they have healthcare coverage?
H-2A workers do not have health coverage. No, they're here without any health care. If they get injured during work, then they are entitled to workers' comp. Yes, by law, they have to be. They are entitled to worker protections. But if they are injured when they're not working, as is the case here, it is our understanding that it would be the responsibility of the transport company. And we know oftentimes they don't have adequate insurance. They don't have adequate policies. So they might be in a limbo. Yeah. This is a very vulnerable community to begin with, and we had this magnitude of tragedy on top of that, and it's just a horrific situation.
How are you dealing with this?
I'm just heartbroken. The driver of the pickup truck that ran into this bus had 5, if I'm not mistaken, previous DUIs. Why is he operating? And also, I haven't heard any mentions in the media characterizing him as a criminal, as a dangerous person. We often hear that about the migrant farm workers, that they're coming here to do crime, that they're immoral people. And it is infuriating that these 8 individuals lost their lives. Some people don't have fathers. Some people don't have brothers, sons now, because of this reckless drunk.
They were being transported by Oliveira Trucking Harvesting Corporation. Do we know who hired them?
My understanding is that they're hired, as is often the case, by a contractor. The contractor then subcontracts to farms that need the work done. That's about as much as I know.
They were going to work at the Cannon Farms watermelon farm outside of Ocala. Does that farm then hold any liability?
If they were injured on the job working at Cannon Farms, yes. But since that wasn't the case, my understanding is that no, they're not liable.
Ernesto, is there anything else that people can do? Is there anything people can do to help right now?
If they can get involved with any local community organizations, be they faith-based, social justice-based, that works with farm workers, that fights for farm worker rights, that people be mindful of where they're getting their food and of the hardships associated with food production. We take it for granted every single day. Every single day we eat fruit and vegetables if we're lucky to afford it. And every single fruit and vegetable is the result of arduous labor that is grossly underpaid. And the wage is just one of the many aspects of labor injustice that these communities face.
And one more question before you go. What about the families of those injured who can't work? What kind of resources are available to them?
I have no idea, Sharon. They're H-2A workers, by and large, travel by themselves. They tend to be men in their 20s. They leave their families behind in their countries of origin. So those families are dependent or expecting the remittances. So it's lost income for them as well. Another tragedy on top of a huge one.
Ernesto Ruiz is a research coordinator with the Farmworkers Association of Florida. There's more ahead here on Engage. Alarming new research about the stress felt by student athletes and the local efforts to support them. We want to hear from you. Let us know what you'd like to hear more about. You can always email us at engage@cfpublic.org. I'm Sharon Stone. You are listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Ahead on this program, professional storyteller Paul Strickland is in town for the Orlando Fringe Festival. He joined us in studio to talk about the challenges of plying his craft.
Sometimes a third of the audience will come in having no idea what they're about to see. They're thinking I'm doing stand-up with a guitar. Mm-hmm. And then I start into a once upon a time story, and they're like, whoa, I literally have said the words once upon a time before, and I saw two people stand up and walk out of the room.
We will hear songs, stories, and the challenges of performing on the festival circuit. First, though, a new report shows that after accidents, suicide is the second most common cause of death of NCAA athletes. The results of a 20-year study were just recently published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. They looked at NCAA athlete deaths from 2002 to 2022 and found the rate of suicide among that population doubled during those years. There was no significant difference in those rates reported by sex, race, or sport. That study did conclude that more suicide prevention efforts tailored to student athletes are needed. After seeing an uptick in mental health crisis as students returned to campus post-pandemic, Bethune-Cookman University leaders say they started implementing opportunities for mental health breaks. We spoke with Clarissa West-White, BCU's faculty athletic representative.
Many places have increased resources, activities. There's more casual conversations about mental health. But what I have learned in this role is that it has to start as a whole community approach. So coaches have to talk to their players about their mental health and what they've done. Many coaches were players. And so what did you do to make it to this point? How did you overcome this negative self-talk, the weight that, is physically pressed upon your shoulders, as opposed to those that come from outside, just that come along with the game of being under such a microscope. So we know that they have to talk about it. Some of our faculty have even started including mental health conversations in their courses, regardless of the course. And sometimes it doesn't take much. It's just a candid conversation about, the stressors of college. And in the class, knowing that more than likely, because our student population and our student athlete population, you don't have to specify, like, I'm only having this conversation because I want to touch student athletes. More than likely, you have student athletes in all your classes. So just talking to your students about mental health and how you deal with your mental health.
Bethune-Cookman University is a private HBCU in Daytona Beach and a Christian-affiliated school where West-White says many find comfort in prayer.
Some of our faculty and coaches start practice and class with prayer. And so it's just having many different alternatives that students can kind of grasp toward. Like, I may not have time for yoga, I may not have time to go to the mental health services. I may not have time to work meditation into my day, but I see that my professor says she prays when she gets a moment. Or I see that another professor talked about controlling their breathing as a way to just reduce stress. So we're trying to get more and more people on campus to just realize that this is a campus-wide initiative and it can't just be left to athletics.
Clarissa West White is BCU's faculty athletic representative. India Campbell is the president of the Student Athlete Advisory Committee that advocates for the well-being of student athletes. Campbell is a cross-country and track and field athlete who just graduated from Bethune-Cookman. She joined Engage to talk about the demands she and others experience. We began by asking India to identify the challenges of being a student athlete.
I think that one of the biggest issues with being a student athlete is being able to find that sense of purpose and sense of identity outside of their sport. A lot of times, especially during COVID, you saw a lot of lost purposes and people getting into these depressions because sports has been all they know or all they have been taught. It's something that people rely on to get them out of financial struggles. A lot of people end up falling in love with sports because it's their mental recovery. It's what they do to relax. It's what helps them, find that sense of purpose. So being able to sculpt your identity outside of sports is extremely difficult, especially in the collegiate setting where 99% of your day is dedicated to athletics. And especially being a student athlete, you have even more demands of trying to be a student at the same time as you're being an athlete. And all the people that you're around are athletes and things like that. Another huge issue that athletics runs into is sometimes feeling that sense of being behind when it comes to career development, because other students have time to take internships, to get other jobs, to get career field experience, whereas student athletes spend so much time in their sport that every day, starts to get repetitive and things like that. And it's difficult to form that sense of identity, again, like I said, outside of athletics. So I think a few of the most demanding aspects of being a student athlete is just those time commitments and then the physical and mental drainage that it puts on you being a student athlete, because you're expected to perform. There's scholarships on the line, there's constantly new people coming in, and there's just constantly so much pressure on student athletes from every aspect that if one doesn't have the tools to manage those stresses and to understand that they're not alone, it's an extremely vulnerable position to be in, especially for collegiate athletes who are typically 18 to 22 years old, just getting out of high school, just discovering who they want to be. There's so many changes going to college because you're already, most people, away from home and things like that, away from, high school. You're usually in your hometowns for nearly your entire life. And now you're getting to college. And not only do you have the changes of adjusting to a completely new environment, completely new class schedules and course rigor, but you also have the pressures of being a student athlete and having those time constraints and putting all of that toll on your body. So there's a lot of conversations to be had, but overall, there's just so much pressure on student athletes that leads to a lot of these mental health disorders and a lot of times undiagnosed mental health disorders as well.
Are conversations about mental health or suicide prevention, are those common among college students on campus?
I would say that they're definitely becoming more common, especially being on the Student Athlete Advisory Committee. I am typically networking and speaking with a lot of the leaders nationwide. So I know in a lot of my areas, mental health is extremely common. And especially on my team, we have a lot of those conversations. Everyone is extremely supportive.
What would you like to see happen moving forward? What do these student athletes need from their schools, universities, now that we are starting to talk more about it?
That's a great question. I think that, to be honest, there's no singular solution when it comes to solving a mental health crisis. I think that every campus is experiencing unique struggles and issues that are going to differ from campus to campus. So I feel like the first step is just hearing out student athletes, giving more space for student athletes to express their concerns. I know with the Student Athlete Advisory Committee, a lot of times I'll try to send out, sometimes anonymous, but sometimes I'll leave a space for people to put their names if they want, me to reach out to them or anything like that. But just sending out Google Forms or different questionnaires for athletes to answer on what their biggest issues are around campus, or what they feel like the staff could do to help them more, what resources would be beneficial. Because like I mentioned earlier, every campus is going to have different solutions and going to have different tools and strategies that work best for that campus. And just like any issue, obviously getting to the causation is typically the best route to find the best solutions for those problems. So I think starting with giving athletes the space to speak up and making sure that everyone feels as though, it is safe for them to speak out, to be heard, and then just finding as many ways as possible to help student athletes create that sense of identity and have understanding who they are as a person outside of their sports, and also, interconnected with their sports. Obviously, it shouldn't be ignore your sport, pretend you're not an athlete or anything like that. It's important to recognize the importance of being a student athlete and what it means to be a student athlete, but also that, you're a person first. Your mental health matters, your goals matter, your dreams matter, everything like that.
Why are you so passionate about this?
A lot of reasons. For one, my oldest brother suffers from schizophrenia and bipolar depression. He was a football player all his life. He played baseball and some other sports as well, but football was the biggest source of concussions, and a lot of his mental health struggles rooted from that. And I've, obviously since then I've witnessed his experience with mental health and how untreated it can go, and there's not enough conversations surrounding the pressures and the dangers of being a student athlete. There's a lot of misconceptions with being a student athlete. There's a lot of underdiagnosing mental health issues because people are scared to speak up, people are scared to lose scholarships and everything like that. And I feel like I've always just been compelled to help others. So when I see an issue as drastic as mental health issues, I am constantly trying to see what I can do to help others and to just be a voice for those who aren't able to speak up for themselves or aren't even able to identify the issue for themselves.
Do you feel like athletes like your brother playing a sport like football, is there just this idea that, tough guys don't talk about stuff like this?
I do think that stigma is slowly changing. However, I think it's still extremely prevalent in athletics today, especially, on the men and women's sides. You see it in every sport, from practices to, the weight room and everything like that. A lot of times student athletes are constantly being told either directly or indirectly that, there's all these negative connotations around being injured, because if you're not playing, then you're not improving your stats, or you're not helping your team, or you're not going to get that increase in scholarship and everything like that. So I think that because of everything that is at stake for student athletes, having injuries and having mental health issues is typically not talked about enough. And I think a lot of it has to do with fear of consequences. And I also think that a lot of it has to do with the lack of knowledge around identifying those mental health issues and disorders, because it becomes so normalized to think a certain way or to have negative thoughts or to feel isolated and things like that. People, either don't want to say that something's wrong with them, or they don't even realize that something's wrong until it's too late, or until it's becomes to a detrimental point where they don't want to ask for help or they're embarrassed and things like that. So I definitely think that sports in general creates a culture of being tough and pushing through and, no days off, rest is for the weak and everything like that. But I think at the end of the day, that culture can become extremely toxic and detrimental to mental health of student athletes and of anyone for that matter.
India Campbell is the president of the Student Athlete Advisory Committee at Bethune-Cookman. If you are struggling with emotional distress or having suicidal thoughts, please know help is available 24 hours a day. You can call or you can text the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988. One of the challenges of pet ownership is that your dog or your cat can't tell you when they're not feeling well. For some animals, that could culminate in debilitating ailments, especially when it involves their eyes. Many popular pet breeds, Shar-Peis, Bulldogs, Persian cats, they're bred for their unique flat faces and those protruding eyes. Over time, though, skin and fur impede vision, and it can cause abrasions on the surface of the eyes. In the veterinary community, there's a gap when it comes to eye specialists. There are actually only 500 in the whole community. That is why Dr. Kate Myrna is in town. She's an associate professor at the University of Georgia College of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Myrna will be training dozens of veterinarians in a crash course in animal ophthalmology at the North American Veterinary Community Institute in Orlando next week. The idea of examining the eyes of dogs and cats intrigued us, so we invited her to talk with us about it. We started this conversation by asking Dr. Myrna about the challenges of treating patients who can't talk back.
Actually, that's sort of the fundamental problem with veterinary medicine in general, right? They can't talk to us. So it's sort of like pediatrics, right? You have a bunch of kids, because as far as I understand, kids also will pee on you and scratch you if they don't like what's going on. And you have to make them comfortable and figure out what's going on just by looking and doing some basic tests and using knowledge. And much like pediatrics, I think it's the clients that are sometimes more challenging than the dogs or horses themselves. Although I have to say, when your patient is a good 4 feet taller than you, it does get a little more challenging to look at them.
Do you have to literally get a ladder?
I have, yes. And I'm lucky because I'm pretty tall, but I train a very vertically challenged ophthalmologist, and she often has to be on a ladder. So,
I kind of thought we would be mostly talking about dogs with eye problems, but I'm learning just in this short time talking to you, it's more than that.
yeah. And I'm at a university, so I see about 70% dogs, 20% horses, and 10% is everything else from bearded dragons to the occasional visit to the aquarium or the zoo, and our cat patients as well. So you really have to know all your species for this particular specialty.
Can we talk about excess eyelid issues with dogs and how that correlates with improving vision for them? And we're talking about cataracts, glaucoma, other vision issues.
Yeah, so what brings my clients through the door are usually when their dogs or their pets are squinting and they don't know why. If they're suddenly having problems being able to see, bumping into things, or if the eye has sort of changed color, it looks hazy blue or just something they're not used to seeing. Luckily, we don't use a lot of needles, and our patients are, I almost never have to give anybody sedation. And I use the same instruments that the human ophthalmologist uses, just that we can't ask our dogs to rest their chin on the table, look left, look right. So I need to be a little more mobile. So I have handheld versions of everything. And one of the things we see really frequently is that there's too much eyelid. And when there's extra eyelid, it has a tendency to roll in, and those hairs start to rub on the surface of your eye, which you can imagine is just terrible.
Yeah, that sounds awful.
That makes them that makes them squint. And then it rolls in more, and then they keep squinting. So one of the things I do pretty regularly is a little bit of plastic surgery. I shorten those lids up, I tuck them out, and I can take a patient who's in chronic pain and take them back to being able to see and be comfortable and happy.
It sounds like any pet owner could be on the lookout for those symptoms, the squinting? Are there other things to be aware of to get ahead of it?
Really, the thing about eye disease is that even small problems can progress to blindness really quickly. And so it's important that you get it checked out by your vet in a timely fashion. If squinting lasts more than just an evening, you should probably make an appointment with your vet. There's only 500 veterinary ophthalmologists in the United States. And so there's not enough of us to see everything. So that's one of the reasons why I'm coming down here to do this NAVC Institute, is to get general practitioners feeling comfortable with a part of the body that, let's be honest, can be a little bit icky. Is that a technical term?
I understand
Eyes do tend to gross people out. So, yeah, we want to make it easy for owners to get reliable evaluations with their local vet, and see if they need to come all the way to a specialist.
Any thoughts about why there are so few specialists that do this? Is that not part of the regular curriculum in veterinary school?
That's a good question. And every school teaches basic ophthalmology, but you have to imagine you're learning all these different species, all these different body systems, and you just can't become an expert at everything right out of vet school. And so every veterinarian has some knowledge of eyes, and it's only a few of us that choose to dedicate our entire lives to just one organ, and in my case, the eye. And that's why these continuing education programs are so important, that if you were in vet school and you said, you know what, I don't really like eyes, this isn't my thing, now you can conquer your eyeball anxiety and get better at it. I try to take away the mystery and the ickiness and make it something really accessible to all of our veterinarians out there.
So you've identified Shar-Peis bulldogs as dogs that can frequently deal with this issue. Does breeding have a role in contributing to these vision problems associated with that excess skin you mentioned?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that contribute to eye problems, and certain breeds are predisposed to issues all over the body. But it's not all breeds have the same problem, or even one breed always has the same problem. So it's just a matter of being able to recognize when there is an issue early. And in fact, ophthalmologists, we spend a lot of time promoting good breeding practice by screening dogs before they breed for inherited problems and things like that. So we try really hard to minimize any sort of problem that would affect vision.
So what will you be doing in Orlando? What's the goal?
So I am doing with my fellow presenters a 4-day immersive course in ophthalmology. Basically, we're cramming a whole semester's worth of eyeball science into 4 days. We're going to go over all the major diseases, how to take really good photos with your cell phone, how to examine the eye without special equipment. And we end up with a bunch of surgeries that general practitioners, your regular vet on the corner should be able to do. And, we have over 50 attendees. And when they walk out, they're going to be well equipped to look at eyes and understand what they're seeing. So I'm excited about it.
What else do you think we should understand?
There have been so many advances in ophthalmology and eye medicine that if your dog loses vision, there may be something that you can do about it. And let me tell you, there is nothing better than a diabetic dog who's gone blind from cataracts. That look that it gives its owner when it sees them for the first time in 6 months. And that's something that never gets old, let me tell you. So, um, you can find out. You can pursue a referral, you can come to see a specialist, and maybe blindness isn't, you know, the only option. We can do a lot more now than we used to do.
Dr. Kate Myrna is an associate professor at the University of Georgia's College of Veterinary Medicine. The North American Veterinary Community Institute training starts on Monday for these veterinary professionals to learn the new skills, and the NAVC is a nonprofit that is headquartered in Orlando. Coming up, the Orlando Fringe Festival is underway. We'll talk with one of the event's storytellers. We want to hear from you. Just a reminder, let us know what you want to hear more about or maybe what you're glad you heard. You can email us at engage@cfpublic.org. And if you missed any part of the show today, you can always subscribe to the Engage podcast and listen when it's convenient for you. This program will be available on demand at cfpublic.org. I'm Sharon Stone. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You are listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. The Orlando Fringe Festival is underway. We're talking about 2 weeks of music, dance, art, and discussions taking place throughout the community. Orlando Fringe has been creating a space for artists and performers to bring their talents to Central Florida since 1992. 100% of the event ticket sales go right back to the artists. Paul Strickland is a Kentucky-based, self-proclaimed professional storyteller and musician who's been participating in Orlando Fringe for 10 years. He's in town for multiple engagements, and he took time out of his schedule to join us in studio, where he began our conversation by explaining how he came to make a living telling tall tales.
I stumbled backwards into this like I've kind of stumbled backwards into everything in my life. Yeah, I went to school, the story goes, I went to school for performance opera, like opera performance and poetry. And the reason that happened, I went to school for opera, and then my dad said, you really should have something to fall back on. So I double majored in poetry. And that's kind of how, and everything in my life has kind of worked out that way, where I started, once I was doing a little bit of like small roles, compromario roles, what they're called in operas, when I was in my early 20s. But I just realized pretty early I wanted to be doing my own material. So then I ended up moving to Nashville, and I kind of tried to get into the songwriter scene there, and then kind of ended up on the stand-up comedy circuit as well as the singer-songwriter circuit a little bit. And eventually I realized that I wanted to be doing stuff more narratively. I wanted to be doing some longer form things. And so I ended up actually finding Orlando Fringe was my first attempt in 2010 at sort of long form storytelling by way of sort of like an hour-long monologue piece. And from there, it has evolved into this wackadoodle thing I do now, which is all fictional storytelling. I say I'm a performer of truth-filled fictions, right? So, yeah.
I didn't realize that the Orlando Fringe Festival was sounds like kind of critical to your development.
It's completely critical to my development. Yeah, it was the first real opportunity to sort of branch out in that way and to give me some space to explore. Kind of what it was that I really wanted to do with my ideas.
How would you describe the Orlando Fringe Festival to someone?
I would say, it is a festival that has not only sort of stand-up comedy and improv, which is what you would probably expect from the outside. There are dance performances. There is clown. I know there is at least one mime there this year. There's whatever it is that I do, which is kind of a concoction or maybe a shenanigan of storytelling and spoken word and song. There's just all kinds of performance art. And there is no sort of boundaries by the festival given. So the artist is actually able to just do whatever they think they want to do, / will hopefully sell some tickets and have some audience in in the house.
Okay, tell me about your performance. Do you go in with a plan, or is it more reacting to how the audience
You know,
is?
it depends on the show.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll do a show where I will literally talk to the audience before the show, and then I'll pick out stories and songs based on that and create an hour trying to sort of match the principle of one of the things I was talking with an audience member about. So this show for Orlando Fringe this year that I'm doing, Absurd It Through the Grapevine, is actually a set show. So it won't be one of those where I'll be sort of picking out the pieces and parts as we go. However, you know, every show's a little different because how the audience reacts does tell me a lot about how it is I want to communicate that story to that particular audience. It's the thing that's different about storytelling as I see it from maybe monologue is that I am reacting to the audience's reaction. And there is an active sense of communication and conversation going on in the theater.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think a good storyteller can make a bad story good?
What a great question. I think a good storyteller can make a bad story their own story and then make it good. I think taking just a bad story and then sort of trying to, I don't know, gussy it up, as my mom would say, is probably not the route. That's probably not the best way to go. But, you know, a lot of times what I do is I take like old folk tales and I do what I call reupholstering them. I'll take bits and pieces of different versions of an old folk tale and put them together and then reupholster it so that it has a contemporary feel to it. So I'm telling you a story that you will find in your Grimm's Fairy Tales, your old dusty copy of Grimm's Fairy Tales. I tell a bunch of those stories, but whenever you hear my version, you don't necessarily realize that's what I'm telling unless you really think about it. So I am telling these old folk tales, but they are, you know, they're housed in a contemporaneity that that maybe hides a little bit of their antiquity.
So you're listening to the audience, even though they're not verbalizing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, otherwise, that's what I believe storytelling is. I think that is what storytelling is and how it differs from from other kinds of theater. Is that it is in the room. It is 100% around the fire. It is in the classroom. Storytelling is a thing where I am telling the story and I see someone's reaction and I adapt the story in minuscule small ways to make sure that it takes care of that person who had that reaction if possible. I always like to have the lights halfway up in the house in a theater because if I can't see the audience, it's much harder for me to tell a story.
Are there any cues that you're able to share with me, or can you just tell?
I mean, it just depends on the kind of story. I mean, just like everything else, if you're telling a ghost story, I mean, I literally had a woman recoil recently during the middle of in the beginning of a ghost story, and I stopped the story and addressed it. I wanted to make sure if she needed to leave, that she had the right to leave. I wanted to make sure she knew she was safe to go. The whole point of a ghost story is to tell terrible things in a safe place, is to have the opportunity to experience terrible things in a safe way. If you don't feel safe at a ghost storytelling, I want you to go for your own safety.
Yeah.
So I stopped the story. I gave her the opportunity. She didn't want to leave. So I continued the story. We got to the very end. I checked in with her again at the end, and then we moved on with the evening. Yeah. But, you know, obviously laughter is a thing. Like, laughter is a way of knowing that people are on board. But also, you know, in my stories, a lot of what I do is magical realist storytelling. So, a quick example. I've got a story in which a guy decides that the best way to keep pigs warm all winter long, he's a pig farmer, is to stack them in like giant poles because he thinks that the body heat of the pig beneath and above would keep the stack warm. Okay. But you know that game where children stand in doorways and press their arms against the doorway for 60 seconds and they step out and then their arms rise against their will?
Okay.
Well, if you leave 9 pigs on top of the bottom 2 pigs for a whole winter, then you take those top 9 pigs off, those bottom 2 pigs float off into the sky. So he ended up losing 2 of his 11 pigs because he did not think that the pigs would float off into the sky, which is the origin of the term when pigs fly and piggyback ride and hog heaven. Right? Yeah. So it's magical realism by way of saying I'm creating a possibly realistic scenario, but there is something that happens in the story that is absolutely not possible. And I am using that not possible thing that I hope the audience wishes were factual as a metaphor.
Okay.
So because they are wishing for it to be true and I am connecting meaning to it, then I'm actually communicating the meaning that I want through the story to them.
I'm joined in studio by Paul Strickland. He is a professional storyteller and theater artist performing at this year's Orlando Fringe Festival. And why do you keep coming back to Orlando?
I love this festival. I think the festival here is, it's really well run. And the audiences, I've been here 14 years, I think it is now. So I have an audience that comes to see me already built in, so that's part of it. But also, there is a different kind of adventurousness at this festival than you see at some other festivals. Some festivals are very dance-based. Mm-hmm. And so then, it's a different kind of uphill battle for what I do in those markets. This festival is very improv and stand-up comedy heavy. So I have to struggle against that a little bit sometimes, and it makes me a better teller. I enjoy the challenge of sometimes a third of the audience will come in having no idea what they're about to see. They're thinking I'm doing stand-up with a guitar. Mm-hmm. And then I start into a once upon a time story, and they're like, whoa, I literally have said the words once upon a time before, and I saw two people stand up and walk out of the room. It was fascinating.
Wow.
Whatever. There's no refunds, so it's fine with me. But I just thought it was really personally hilarious that the moment they heard that it was going to be a story, that they were out, And of course, it's a very funny story. So if they had stayed, then they would have gotten probably at least a bit of what they thought they were going to get, which is an opportunity to laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a quick judgment and their loss.
Yeah, fair enough. I believe that as well.
Can I put you on the spot and ask you to share some of your work with us?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So this is the thing I do whenever I feel like I need to introduce the concept of what I do to an audience. Sometimes I'll say, why fictional storytelling? I was talking to a friend, Liesel, and she has a dad who was friends with a boatman in Europe. And he had a boat that he rented to tourists, and tourists would get in the boat, and he would take them on these romantic rides, right? And I guess that makes sense to me, like paying a lot of money to have motion sickness while you go around in a circle and then get dropped off where you started. I've had a lot of romances like that. So people get in the boat as these tourists, and he takes them down, and there were these two tourists that I guess had never done this kind of thing before. Were from a place that didn't have tunnels, I reckon. They got in the boat. They take a right curve into a long tunnel. And in a long tunnel, there's like that dime-sized exit with light pouring in all the way at the far end of the tunnel. Well, this couple starts freaking out. They start panicking. They're literally like, stop the boat! Stop the boat! I guess they were in Italy. Stop the boat! Right? And the boatman is like, what is wrong with you? And they're like, this boat is too large for that hole. Like, this boat will not get through that exit. You've got to stop the boat. And the boatman says, no, I do this every day. It's okay. Everything's going to be fine. And they, no, stop the boat! We are not going to make it through. And they're like looking over the sides of the boat like they're going to jump. And the boatman, so he says, it's okay. I pay a man at the end of the tunnel to turn a crank that opens up the exit. So it will be big enough by the time we get there. And the couple calm and sit down and just enjoy the ride like they were going to anyway. Because sometimes a fictional story is what I need to get through. Because sometimes a fictional story, a folk tale, a fairy tale, a tall alternative tale, is what I need to see that I can make it through. On the other side, the boatman helped the couple out of the boat, and they tipped him handsomely. And as they were walking away, the boatman said, excuse me, could you also spare a tip for my friend who turns the tunnel crank? You know what? Let's do, I've got a little midlife crisis song called Running Out of Time. Recently came to the overwhelming emotional epiphany that I'm very likely running out of time. That's why I'm trying to cram as much as I can into every line. And to be honest, I'm feeling a bit winded. I should probably stop and catch my breath and not prattle myself into some multisyllabic death. Try to be more like a rhetorical question and find the answer myself. Tick-tock, tick-tock, is that the answer or the question? Is the clock trying to teach me a lesson, or is it just using its hands as best as it can? Just going through the motions that it doesn't understand. These are all metaphors. I'm over halfway now through this song, and to be honest, it doesn't feel like I've been playing very long, but it's been full of wonder and surprise. Man, I just don't want to play it wrong. But to be honest, the questions, they have changed. They've evolved and rearranged. They've reprioritized. To act like you know anything seems strange. Tick-tock, tick-tock, is that the answer or the question? Is the clock trying to teach me a lesson, or is it just using his hands as best as it can? Just going through the motions that it doesn't understand. I recently came to the overwhelming emotional epiphany that I'm running out of time. That's why I ran out of time, I guess.
Paul Strickland is a professional storyteller participating in this year's Orlando Fringe Festival. You can catch him tonight at 5:30 at the Starlight Room at Savoy. We will have Fringe schedule links on our website. We too have run out of time. That is all for today's edition of Engage. We'll be back on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. All of our shows are available on demand at cfpublic.org. I'm Sharon Stone. Thank you for joining us. All Things Considered with Nicole Darden-Creston is up next on Central Florida Public Media following NPR News.